A problem of genocide proportions. The UN children's charity UNICEF says the culture of favouring males in India is costing the lives of millions of young girls. Supreme Court judges say there's rampant feticide and infanticide, and they say the mindset of parents and society needs to change. Hello there, I'm Shuli Ghosh, you're with Inside Story. Supreme Court judges in India have summoned health secretaries in 7 states over a worrying fall in the number of young girls. They're demanding details about clinics flouting the law to determine the sex of unborn babies, with potentially fatal consequences. The UN says more than 2,000 illegal abortions are being carried out every single day, and it's dramatically altering the balance of the population. The 1991 Indian census showed there were 945 girls for every 1,000 boys aged up to 6. 10 years later, and that number had fallen to 927. And in 2011, it had dipped even further to just 914 girls for every 1,000 boys. And that's just the average. The figures are far worse in several states. The 2011 census found there were 830 girls for every 1,000 boys in the northern state of Haryana. It was 846 in neighbouring Punjab state. And in the National Capital Territory of Delhi, the figure was 866. Well, let's talk more about this with our guests today. From New Delhi, Suhas Chakma, Director of the Asian Centre for Human Rights. Also in New Delhi, we have Dr. Mitu Khurana. She's a paediatrician and women's rights activist. And in Washington, D.C., we're joined by Sudanand Dume, a resident fellow of the American Enterprise Institute. Welcome to all my guests today. Mitu, let's start with you. The UN is saying this is a problem of genocide proportions, something like up to 50 million women and girls missing in India if you compare the population to other countries. That's appalling.
It has been continuing since a long time, and it was in 1991 when the government in its census they saw that this sex ratio is pretty low. So first they thought that perhaps the girls are not being counted in the census, but when they rechecked it they found that the girls are not being born. So that is why in 1994 this act was enacted. However, it was never implemented. In 2003 also the Supreme Court sent a notice to all the states of India, and they all came, and the Supreme Court noticed, it has put it there in its order that we have noticed that the states are not implementing the act at all. There is total laxity, and it gave a warning to all the states to start implementing the act. However, by 2011 we have seen there is a further drop. There have been minimal convictions, and the authorities are basically very hesitant to use the law to implement the law, because
you're talking about
people
the act
supposed to implement the law.
Mitu, just to be clear, you're talking about the law which bans medical staff from using scanning techniques to determine the sex of unborn children.
That is a Preconception and Prenatal Diagnostic Techniques Act, PCPND Act.
And why is it not being enforced?
Basically, the people who are supposed to be enforcing it, they themselves have the same patriarchal mindset, and even they don't feel that it's wrong to kill a girl in the desire of a boy.
But they're doctors.
So when the authorities, the CDMOs, the district medical officers who are being supposed to implement the act, when they themselves feel that it's not wrong to kill a girl child in the desire of a boy, naturally they won't go and prosecute anybody. And added to it is corruption. There is the doctor's body, the radiologist's body is a very strong body which does not allow any of its members to be caught. So there is a whole lot of, the mindset hasn't changed over the years.
Suhas, sorry to interrupt you, Mitu. Let me bring in Suhas, because this seems to be a phenomenon. Mitu is talking about a mindset here. This mindset seems to cross all castes and all classes in India.
Oh, that's true, and also I think first of all the root cause is the dowry system, where a girl who is born is seen to be a burden over the family, and because of that reason that in a number of cases, or majority of the cases, the girl child is killed. At the end of the day, if you want to address this problem, it has to be through enforcement of the law as well as the raising of awareness. Now, if we look at it, the Supreme Court itself has taken 3 years to summon the health secretaries of the 7 states. And the petition itself was filed in 2009. Now, the question is, how does one enforces the law? Because of the fact that the Medical Council of India, which is supposed to supervise the work or the ethical of the work being done by the doctors, have not suspended anybody till date for violations of the ethical guidelines. Secondly, as Meetu had mentioned, there are officials within the system, and I would say political leaders, the judges, who themselves actually see the daughters as a burden. Now, if you want to change that, it can only be changed through enforcement of the law, which itself will raise awareness. And at the moment, if you look at the Medical Council of India, you have the Medical Council of India taking actions against doctors who have given false information that they were teaching in certain universities, in medical colleges, despite the fact that they were not present there. Now, the question is, if you can take actions against the medical professionals in this manner, why can't you take action against the doctors or those radiologists who are practicing determination of the sex?
Okay.
And if you do not take actions, at the end of the day, you have a
I just wanted
situation you can't take action.
Let's expand on the law, because we've mentioned the law several times. So let's just talk about that. India has very strict abortion laws. Until 1971, terminating pregnancies was only allowed if the mother's life was at risk. Well, other exceptions were then allowed for fetuses with potential birth defects, for babies conceived through rape, and for pregnancies in unmarried girls under 18. Now, in 1994, the government passed a new law making it illegal to use ultrasound scans to determine the sex of the baby. And that's a crime carrying a jail term of up to 3 years. But as we've been hearing from our guests so far, that law doesn't seem to be being enforced at all. Sudan and Dume, why are these kind of attitudes persisting in a country which is supposed to be one of the world's fastest developing economies?
Well, it's not just that they're persisting, but in many ways they seem to be getting worse. So, we like to believe that, all good things go together, and because a country's economy is developing quickly, it would also be developing more rational ways of thinking about women, more enlightened ways of thinking about women and girl children. But in fact, we find in many parts of India, in fact, it's the opposite. In most of India, in fact, you find that this has accompanied economic development. You mentioned Punjab and Haryana earlier in your comments. Punjab and Haryana happen to be two of India's richest states. They also happen to be two of the states with the worst gender imbalance. So I think we have to disaggregate this. We have to take away economic growth, and we should not expect economic growth to necessarily deliver the right outcomes over here. I'd like to sort of jump in on one other issue with my two other colleagues over here, where they, were talking about the courts and the law and the administration and the implementation of the law. I think that is part of it, but I don't think that's the main problem. The main problem really is that parents don't want girl children. As long as that underlying societal attitude continues, it's very, very difficult, especially in a country like India, where many laws, of all kinds of laws, are not implemented properly, are flouted. It's very hard to find a purely legal solution to what is a societal problem.
I mean, Sudan, I'm interested in what you're saying about, the economic aspects of this, because I was quite surprised that Delhi, which is a rich and modern area, also has a wildly skewed sex ratio of girls to boys. And I'm just interested in why women are seen as such, or girls are seen as such a poor thing to invest in. They're seen as being a financial burden compared to boys. And why is that attitude persisting? Why can't that be educated out of people?
Well, I hope it is educated out of people. So far, it hasn't been. Partly, this is always a patriarchal system. Many places are patriarchal, but the problem in India is particularly dire.
But there are a lot of powerful women in India, aren't there?
They are, and that's the paradox, right? So you have people at the top who are incredibly powerful. You probably have more prominent political leaders in India than in most any other Asian country, certainly more than I can think of. However, that doesn't change the underlying prejudices that exist in society. Now you look at Punjab, look at Haryana, look at Delhi, look at Gujarat. These are all prosperous states, but they have terrible gender imbalance. Now the issue really is, how do you get society to change its attitudes? The attitudes we're talking about are rooted in the idea that when parents grow old, they will live with their sons, and that their daughters, when they get married, no longer belong to them, but belong to the other family. And these are very, very deeply ingrained attitudes that need to be challenged and need to be fought.
Me too. I can see you nodding there. Sudanan makes the point that, OK, legislation is one thing, going after doctors who perform these scans and these abortions is one thing, but you have to educate the parents into not seeing girls as burdens. I was quite interested to see that the UN says that girls are twice as likely to die as boys before the age of 5 in some areas, because in some poor areas, parents won't deliberately neglect girl children because they're seen as such a bad investment.
See, basically what I would like to say is education, if it would have solved the problem, it would have gone from South Delhi, Southwest Delhi, but we see that the sex ratios are lowest in some of the most educated areas of Delhi. In fact, Kerala, which is more than 100% literacy, it has also started practicing female feticide. And the civil society members, they have been trying since past many years to bring in about this mindset change. And perhaps this mindset change will take another many years to happen. It will take centuries to happen. It won't be an overnight change. But the way this genocide is happening, a break has to be put immediately. And if that break has to be put immediately, I see it has to be a combination of change in mindset, educating people, and a proper implementation of the law.
Suhas,
why can't they make the authorities...
I can see that you're trying to jump in there. What's your opinion?
No, I think, first of all, I think we have to look at the way the economic development is taking place. Is in a way facilitating sexual determination of sex of the babies, because you could buy a machine with $10,000 and you could, of course, recover the money very quickly. But at the end of the day, there will not be a purely legalistic solution. But I think we have to learn lessons from other similar type of social problems. I think one of the problems which we had in Delhi and as well as in North India was problems relating to dowry deaths, where actually brides are burned to death. The fact that the government of India had brought a legislation called Anti-Dowry Act, and the provisions are so stringent, the fact that a number of families actually do not dare any longer to take extreme measures of burning the brides to death. So we have to learn from these experiences, and I believe that if you enhance the punishment under this prenatal determination tax for, say, from 3 years to 7 years, and if you make it non-bailable, and if you make the proving of the offense easier, and if you convict enough people, I am sure there will be a deterrence. But at the end of the day, if you do not enforce the law, you are not going to change the mindset of the people, because we have seen that the highest number of the ratio where between the boys and girls is taking place inside Delhi. Now, if that's the case, then of course there is something wrong with the mindset of the people. It's not education alone which can look at it. You have to enforce the law. I think at the end of the day, it's the fear of the law which will ask people or force people to basically consider taking this kind of drastic steps. Incentives being given by the governments are not adequate. The law has to be enforced. Now, if you have the General Secretary or the President of the Medical Council of India being prosecuted for corrupt practices, what can you expect from the Medical Council of India? The Medical Council of India will have to play a primary role, and at the end of the day, even today, neither the petitioner in the court nor the court itself has actually any idea how to enforce the law. Everybody knows the problem is, but there is no solution inside, and that's why the court itself actually has been looking for solutions.
This is it's obviously a very emotive subject that we're talking about, and we've had lots and lots of emails and postings on Al Jazeera's Facebook page. Let me just read you a couple of these. Teresia Karapia Javorek says, "I wonder if any of these societies have thought about the fact that eventually there'll be no women to carry children for their sons." Susan Oskan says, above anything else, the minds of Indian people about thinking that a girl baby is somehow a burden on the family has to change. Jenny Latif says, make dowries illegal, first of all. Free or discounted prices for education, healthcare, etc. for girls. More incentives. Amir Syed says aborting female fetuses is both practical and socially acceptable in India. And he says female feticide is driven by many factors, primarily by the prospect of having to pay a dowry to the future bridegroom of a daughter. Sudanand, one of the big side effects of all of this, in fact, is that, of course, is that, you know, in some parts of India, there's a whole generation of young men growing up with no women to marry. I mean, there is a demographic crisis happening here, isn't there?
Yes, it is. It's quite remarkable. There are in some parts of India, for example, in Haryana, people are having to look for brides on the opposite end of the country, in Kerala, which is one of the few places that still has a positive gender balance. And so what you're seeing is something quite unprecedented, because the brides have just dried up. And I don't see this getting better in the short term. I'm coming back to what needs to be done about this. You know, I don't have a problem with better implementation of the law, but we have to recognize that there are almost no laws in India that are properly or fully implemented. So what I think we have to sort of, in the meantime, we need to start thinking a little bit more creatively about other things. So, for example, one of the things that's very difficult for middle-class parents to do in India is to get their children into kindergarten. And there's all kinds of sort of elaborate formulas that are in place to sort of, you know, how you weight it to allow your kids to get a space in kindergarten. If you could tinker with stuff like this, if you could sort of put in place really clear, practical reasons why it makes sense, why it's advantageous for you to have a daughter or more than one daughter, I think you're going to begin to make a dent. This is not going to happen overnight, but I think that to focus this purely on implementation of the law or on tightening the laws or on making the laws harsher would be a mistake.
Well, it's interesting. I don't know whether any of my guests will be surprised that despite repeated requests, we couldn't get anyone from the Indian government to come onto the programme and to speak about this. We did find a comment from the Indian Prime Minister Manmohan Singh back in 2011, who called for a crusade against the widespread practice of feticide and infanticide. He said, "The falling child sex ratio is an indictment of our social values. Our girls and women have done us proud in classrooms, in boardrooms and on the sports field. It's a national shame for us that despite this, female feticide and infanticide continues." Mitu, is this a priority of the government? Does the government recognise this as a huge problem, and is it doing something about this?
I have written to the Prime Minister, I have written to the President, I wrote to the Chief Minister, I have approached all of them when I was trying to save my daughters. I have written to them multiple times and I have never received any reply or any help from them. I had twin daughters whom my in-laws were forcing me to abort. And when I wanted to save them, I wrote to all these people who were saying that it's a national shame. And none of them ever responded back.
Does that surprise you, Sudanand?
I think that's...
Well, I actually just, you know, I have to say that I disagree slightly with Mitu. I don't think the problem in India is a shortage of enlightened opinion at the top. There is enlightened opinion at the top. If you talk to top politicians, if you talk to Supreme Court judges, if you talk to leading journalists, I don't think you're going to sort of sit around and have a conversation with the most powerful people in India where they tell you that, you know, we think female feticide is a wonderful thing. The problem is not a lack of enlightenment at the very top. The problem is a lack of enlightenment in society at large. And the difficulty that people who do hold the right opinions, to have enlightened views, have in turning those into policies or incentives that can turn this around.
Suhas, do you agree with that?
No, I would say the government officials, including the Prime Minister, they're absolutely insensitive towards the issue. It's one thing to speak nice words in a national address or in a press interview. It's another thing to formulate a policy. At the moment, the government of India provides 2 lakhs rupees, that's about 200,000 rupees or about $5,000. If you have 2 children, girl child, and that will be given after they turn 18. Now, that's not an incentive. If you provide 2 lakhs, after 18 years you get that. Is that an incentive that you are trying to convince people that it's, you know, it's not a burden to have a girl child? No, that's not the way the government should look at it. A policy if it is to discourage people from choosing boys, has to come immediately from the time when the girl child is born till she is 18 years. The system must provide support up to that level. If you do not provide any support system during this 18-year period, and the government announced that they will give 200,000 rupees after 18 years, that's absolutely nonsense. But nobody will die, or nobody will wait for 18 years to get 200,000 rupees and have two children. And at that time, when they become 18, you possibly can't even get married up these two girls with 200,000 rupees.
Mithu, do you think that Indian society's focus on the position of women there has been channeled by the dreadful gang rape case that happened in Delhi recently? Are people now talking about women's position in society and about discrimination against girls?
See, rapes have been happening over a long time, and yes, this gang rape has brought the people of the country to the roads. This has acted as an alignment. Though I'm very optimistic, I'm very happy to see the people coming out on the roads and saying that we want equality between women, we want their rights and everything. But we have to just remember that same time, same months last year also, we were very angered when there was a baby Falak who was killed to death by her father because he didn't want a daughter. There was a white rage protest, there was rage, but with time everything died out. So if we want this change to happen, this protest, this uprising, it has to be continuous. It has to maintain the level at which it is going on.
Because but what about the women who go along with this, Mithu? Because, I mean, women, you know, some women are put under a great deal of pressure to abort female children. But should we also be blaming the women who agree to go through this, or is that unfair?
Can you just please repeat?
Yeah, I'm asking about the women themselves who agree to abort female fetuses.
Yeah.
Are we right to excuse them for their action because they're under tremendous pressure from, I don't know, society or family or their husbands? Or should we be saying that these women themselves should be saying no to these procedures?
See, there is a social conditioning which is there right from the time a girl is born. When she is born, she grows up seeing her mother being beaten up by her father. She is eating last in the family. She is being insulted. She sees her brother getting priority over her. She sees her brother going to the schools while she is at home. She is being starved. So naturally, by the time she grows up, there is a big social conditioning that to be a son or to have a son is always better. You know, the social conditioning is always there. And second thing is that if a woman decides to say no, it many times results in her being turned out of the family, her having to leave the home, extreme violence against her. And with an insensitive authorities, the insensitive society, the judiciary, which always sees as a separated woman as a stigma, it's very, very difficult for a woman to fight back all these forces and say, no, I want to keep my daughters.
Sudanand, do you see things changing? Do things have to change? Because if they don't, it's going to be a bit of a disaster for India, isn't it?
I mean, I'm cautiously optimistic about the long term. I think what you have seen is a much greater public awareness, particularly among the middle class. As you correctly pointed out, this horrific gang rape in Delhi last month has also galvanized a larger national debate about the status of women more broadly. So I think that there's a sort of there are positive signs over there, but much more needs to be done because in concrete terms, things are still quite bad.
And last word to Suhas quickly. Do you agree with that? Are you optimistic that things are going to change?
No, not at all. I mean, if you look at this act, which was brought in 1994, and if you look at today, actually the number of girls have completely gone down, and it will go down further in the next 3 decades, or 4 decades. Now, at the end of the day, if the judiciary itself is insensitive, if the political leaders themselves are insensitive, and there are a number of cases where senior political leaders and the judges from the high courts demanding dowry from their daughter-in-laws, then obviously you cannot have a change in the situation.
It was a fascinating discussion. We've come to the end of it. Thank you very much indeed to Suhas Chakma, Mithu Khurana and Sudanand Dume. And that's it from us. If you have any views on any of our reports this week, tweet me at HackHound or email us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. For the moment, from me, Shuli Ghosh. Bye for now.